Wisdom cries out in the streets. In the square she raises her voice. As we read the Bible in a year, we are encountering several bits of literature that describe themselves as wisdom or talk about wisdom. But what does it mean in the context of the Bible? Well, I've come to a very wise place, to the University of Roehampton, and we're going to talk to a friend of mine, Dr. John Moxon, from the theology department here, who's going to help us a little bit. So, John, what is wisdom literature in the Bible?
Well, wisdom literature is best described as a kind of literature, and then when I mention the names of some books, you'll realise what I mean. It is very practical teaching, sometimes reflective teaching, which is relatively unhistorical. Nobody's saying this is the 6th century and we've got a real problem with the Babylonians. It's all just about living life, and that's the way we would use wisdom today. So I'm thinking particularly about books like Proverbs, but also that highly peculiar book Ecclesiastes, and then also the book of Job that we'll be mentioning in a minute. These books are examples of things which are really quite popular in the ancient world. Nearly all religious traditions actually have them, but they're also remarkably untheological in many ways. They're reflecting at a slightly higher level, but very rarely mention the doctrine of atonement or the law or anything complicated like that. They're just wondering, how are we going to get through this, and how could I teach my children to avoid even getting into this mess?
And so you've hinted at it already, but what is the purpose of wisdom literature? Why did it emerge? What need does it fill?
I think one of the great things is that it baptizes into a place of centrality what one might call ordinary theologizing by people in their everyday lives. It very much says that this clear thinking and a good life is not beyond the wit of ordinary people, unaided by priestly castes and experts. And as you may know, that we're rather against experts at the moment in public life. And so the wisdom literature is a great advert for surviving without having to understand an awful lot at that very technical level. There is a sense that anything that gets written down, you have to kind of find a friendly scribe to do that for you. But there's a strong evidence of a folk element to the wisdom tradition, including storytelling. And I'm thinking, for instance, about the story of Esther. Really is a proverb. For such a time as this, let me tell you a story about that. So some of them are in narrative form in that way, but anybody can tell those stories and anybody can understand them.
And we are just plunging into the wonderful world of Job. And Job is perhaps sometimes the crown of wisdom literature. Could you give us a little hint about what should we be looking out for in Job? How should we approach this wonderful book?
Right. Well, Job is amongst the books that we call reflective, discursive wisdom, rather than, for instance, just a list of one-liners. I don't know if you like Tim Vine, but I'm a great fan of it. So proverb is one-liners for the most part. A stitch in time saves 9 and things of that kind. Job has a kind of a narrative framework, or a man who had everything and then became catastrophically involved in a whole load of accidents, natural disasters, and then illness. And at the end, that is restored. But behind the scenes, we learn a terrible truth, that God has actually put money on this. There's a kind of bet going on, that his faith won't crumble. And the devil says, I bet it will. And God says, I bet it won't. This is known in the trade as subversive wisdom. That it is actually questioning what the rules of the game actually are. Whereas one might say that proper theological books like St. Paul are very concerned to find out what the rules are. And Job says, yes, but the rules don't work. And there are other books. Ecclesiastes, in its own way, does something very similar. You know, I've had everything in this life, And I get home at the end of the day and I still don't know what it's for. And this is the film star's story. There are celebrities all over who will be saying that at the end of every day. And God thinks it's important for us to realise that's what the end of some people's days are like.
Mm-hmm. And finally, John, in your life, which has, like all lives, known the ups and downs of human existence, is there a piece of wisdom literature that has stuck with you or that you would recommend to us?
I would, if I'm allowed to just mention two things, I do very much still like the book of Proverbs. And if you get into that, you'll realise there's some highly colourful ones. Proverbs 26:17, an excellent one for church life and business life. Anybody who gets involved in an argument that has nothing to do with them is like a man who goes into the street and grabs a stray dog by the ears. That's Proverbs 26:17, which I particularly like. But the other bit of wisdom comes from Jesus, who's reflecting upon a wisdom book that was written in between the end of the Old Testament and when he lived, where he says in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And it is actually he's voicing not a famous sage from the past, but wisdom herself. I say that because wisdom is invariably a female figure. And what he's saying is that the problem with religion is that it can end up being far too much hard work. In his own day, he accused the Pharisees and other experts of starting from a hard place and then placing heavy burdens on people's backs after that. And he says, I'm not going to run things like that. And I wish I'd learnt that sooner.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for joining us.